We only have 4 more of these that remain. Week 11 is upon us. Already underway for those that are enjoying action and CUSA in the midweek. You even got some Sunbelt and AAC coming up on Thursday night. We'll talk about all of those. Kyle Schass Tripp Hurd, and Phil Steele, the Godfather himself, the Titan of the College Football Preview Magazine World. Follow him on Twitter on X at PhilSteele042. I'm at Kyle Schass at Locks of the Dock. Phil, it's been a busy week. Action earlier in the week. That's what you were completely glued in, locked into on Tuesday night with so much going on in the world. It's all football in the Steele residence.
Yeah, that's all I do, college football. I probably work about 100 hours a week, a little over 100 hours a week, and on nothing but college football.
And that means no CFP rankings. Phil doesn't subscribe to that, as
No.
most of you should not, because we have 4 weeks to determine this bracket 5 if you count conference championship weekend. So, that's not for us. We're here to break down games. We're football junkies. Phil is the biggest junkie of them all. And Phil, how about our boy Tripp Hurd? The lock maybe has not been picked. The dude had his first undefeated weekend this past weekend in week 10. There's a lot of red on our dock as I go through. But Phil, what do you think of our boy? Tripp came through 3-0 this past week.
Tripp is on fire. We'll have to see where he goes this week with his plays. But congratulations, Tripp. Nice weekend.
Thank you. I was very, very much due.
Speaking of being due, Phil brought this out earlier in the season. You'll see it scrolling across the bottom. Appreciate the audience that checks in on the Varsity channel on YouTube each and every week. The audience continuing to grow to each and every week. It's amazing. Plus, the audio audience, the OGs on the College Sports Now podcast feed, we appreciate you as well. We haven't forgotten about you wherever it is you podcast. But if you remember earlier this week, I think it was week 4 or week 5, Phil gave the Phil Steele Show Guarantee. And what that means is his power plays, which will come at the end of this program, should Phil go 2-1 or better. Okay, so over 500, he can go perfect. He's going to give you 3 power plays at the end of this program. So that's roughly 55 minutes from now. If Phil goes 2-1 or better with those plays inside the press box, the NFL inside the press box will be free for you this weekend. Tell you go through it, Phil, because I'm going to word vomit everywhere. So give me the spiel.
It's a guaranteed winning week. So we must go 2-1 or 3-0. If for any reason it's not a winning week, you get my press box. NFL, absolutely free on Sunday morning. All you have to do is type in the code word PS show. But so the last time we had a guaranteed winning week, we went 3-0. So there was no guarantee, no payoff, but we got to have a winning week this week, or you get my NFL press box, a $20 value, absolutely free.
Yeah, it makes more sense that way. When I'm thinking about it in my head, I get things backwards quite a bit. So, yes, if Phil goes 2-1 and better, it's not free, all right? Because he's doing the service that we all expect out of Phil Steele each and every week on this program, and that is giving you guaranteed winners. If, for whatever reason, he doesn't give you a 2-1 week or better, then you'll get NFL Inside the Press Box free this weekend, which is week 10 in the NFL on Sunday, a $20 value. The code is PS Show. So you will see that scrolling across the bottom as a reminder throughout our Week 11 program here today. Phil, let's get right into it. I know Tripp's got the first one teed up on Thursday night, so go ahead and take us to Conway.
Yeah, let's get started. Conway, South Carolina. Coastal Carolina hosting App State. I've seen Coastal lane 1. Depending on where you shop, you might be able to get App State lane 1. It's maybe we should just call it a pick'em for the sake of the show. App is coming off back-to-back wins over Georgia State and Old Dominion. Phil, I think you were on both of those plays. Coastal coming into this one on a 3-game losing streak, lost by double digits in all of those games as well. But they've won the last 2 in this series. It just feels like App State's playing better ball here at the moment.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head, Tripp. I think these are 2 ships passing in the ocean, and one's headed in one direction, the other in the other. And App State really can salvage their season. Remember, they opened up 2-4, didn't look good. They've won the last 2. They can finish off the season strong, and I think they will. I like the way that Joey Aguilar is playing. Take a look at the fact that in the last 2 games, he's had a 7-1 ratio. Prior to that, it was about a 50-50, and this guy had a 33-10 ratio last year. So App's playing their best ball. And Coastal Carolina opened up 4-1, but as you mentioned, Tripp, they've lost their last 3. They're really struggling. They even lost to Troy at home, a struggling Troy, or on the road, but a struggling Troy team got outgained by 198 yards. The last 4 weeks, they're minus 125 yards per game. App State's plus yards per game. And they're playing with revenge on Phil Steele Plus. I have the revenge plays, and I believe the revenge plays are something like 77 and 32 over 2 years. Apps playing with legitimate revenge, better team. I see them going on the road and getting the win here.
Phil Steele Plus, all that premium content available, philsteele.com. More information there. Phil will give us a sneak peek at a time or two here throughout the program as well at his screen, what he looks like, what he looks at on Phil Steele Plus. There is one other game on Thursday. It's Florida Atlantic visiting ECU. I'm rocking an ECU shirt. The family and I, we're going to take that 3-hour drive here this afternoon. We'll be there at Dowdy Ficklin. Might need some ponchos. There is some rain in the forecast, but the weather's beautiful beyond that, at least temperature-wise. High 60s, low 70s. Pirates are laying 7.5. 57 is the total. 8 o'clock on ESPN2. Pirates lead the all-time series 2-0, winning 22-7 in Boca last season, 31-13 when they last met in Greenville in 2013. But, FAU's going in one direction. The momentum maybe from Blake Harrell and the coaching change that they made, moving on from Mike Houston. I mean, they scored a season-high 56 points against Temple a couple of weeks ago. Coming off the bye, 29 third-quarter points. Tom Herman didn't want any of Alex Golish, too, last weekend in the postgame against USF. It looks to be tumultuous, to say the least, for Herman and the Owls. Do you got to play? Do you got to feel in one direction or the other this evening in Greenville?
Yeah, I probably lean a little bit with East Carolina. I was, you're watching the Florida Atlantic USF game last week. Florida Atlantic was really in control in the first half. They had 306 to 195 yard edge. It led that thing 14-7, and then boom, the second half happened. And you got to wonder about the team's mindset right now. They've had 3 straight losses. They're 2-6. Where's the positivity? I mean, if they win this game, they do have Temple, Charlotte, Tulsa, all winnable games on deck. They could still salvage a bowl season. But as you said, East Carolina, the last 2 games actually has had season highs against their opponent. The 369 yards were the most any opponent had against Army, and the 500 yards they had basically against Temple. Once again, a season high. So playing with good momentum at home. I'm going to go with East Carolina here.
I'm going to take you to Friday night. We got a few games on the docket. We're just going to cover 2 of them. 4 games in total on Friday. Let's start in Winston-Salem, where Tripp and I are right now recording this show with you. First meeting between Cal and Wake Forest, 3rd road game in the Eastern time zone for the Bears. Cal's 4 wins have come by nearly 21 points per game. Those 4 losses, all in the ACC, still winless in the league by an average of 2.25. I mean, close, heartbreaking losses for the Golden Bears. Will Justin Wilcox and the favorite Bears, it's a touchdown spread here, be able to score their first ever ACC win in Winston, cover that spread against a Deke squad that split each of its 4 league games?
Yeah, and the spread's exactly where I thought it would be for this game. If you look at Cal, much better than their record. I mean, the Florida State game, they had a 126-yard edge, but lost. Miami of Florida, they had a massive lead and lost. Pitt, they missed the game-winning field goal at the end. NC State, they missed the game-winning field goal at the end. This is a team that's basically 4 plays away from being unbeaten this year. I love them. But Wake Forest is also dangerous at home, and Clausen's got the offense with Bachmeyer at QB, Claiborne at running back, and then Marin and Fields at the receiver position. I like how they're playing, and they're at home. They're catching Cal traveling across the country. We've seen Cal not put teams away as a favorite until last week when they blew out Oregon State. So I would have put the line at Cal -7. I think that's the lines makers got it right where it should be.
Very interesting game in the Big Ten Friday night with Iowa and that high-powered offense heading west to take on UCLA. 30.8 points per game for the Hawkeyes this season. Can you believe that? I've got
there's
Iowa.
not a lot of defensive scores either.
Yeah, that's right. I've got Iowa laying 5.5 on the road right now, total at 44.5. A lot of people, including myself, wrote off the Bruins very early this season. They lost in week 2 to Indiana, 42-13. Well, guess what? Hoosiers, they're pretty good. UCLA covered against both Oregon and LSU. It could have easily gone the other way in those games, but very good teams. They played Minnesota very tough. Minnesota looks pretty good right now. Straight up wins the last 2 weeks at Rutgers and at Nebraska last week. It's an improving football team. Good on Deshaun Foster. If they could somehow find a way to win 3 of the last 4, they could make a bowl game. Didn't think we'd be able to say that a few weeks ago. I think it'll be a competitive game. While I do lean the under, I know better than to do that now with Iowa. Even without McNamara, they really haven't needed him with Caleb Johnson just running all over everybody. What do you like here, Phil?
Yeah, and Brandon Sullivan also gives him a little bit more mobility out of the quarterback position, something else you have to account for, and that's allowing. I love the way Johnson runs after contact as well. Iowa's 19-1 in the month of November. They've got the veteran head coach and Ferentz, and I think they're a team that's going to peak like they normally do in the month of November. Talking to Wayne Cook on the Tuesday night podcast, Wednesday morning podcast, I should say. UCLA did play that killer schedule: Indiana, LSU, Oregon, Penn State, and they have played a lot better recently, but they still struggle to run the ball. I don't think you could be a one-dimensional offense taking on Iowa. Iowa will come up with some turnovers, and I just like the way Iowa's playing overall. So I'm going to take Iowa minus the points on the road to come out of here with the win, and I think you're going to see a lot of Iowa fans in attendance here.
All right, let's jump to Saturday. Maybe a little revenge game in the ACC this Saturday at noon. Miami on the road at Georgia Tech. Remember how that played out last year in South Florida. The Hurricanes could have kneeled it out, but they didn't. They end up losing the game. This one's in Atlanta, Bobby Dodd Stadium. Miami's an 11.5-point favorite on the road. Big question for Georgia Tech again this week. Quarterback Haynes King, is he going to be available or will he not? I think with him at full strength, I would love Georgia Tech at home getting double-digit points, but for me, I've got to wait for an update on the quarterback situation for the Yellow Jackets, Phil.
Great analysis, Tripp. That's exactly. I would have said the exact same thing. So you're doing your homework over there. Yeah, Haynes King is the difference maker with Georgia Tech, and they're dangerous as a dog. You look at Brent Key. This guy is 5-1 straight up as a double-digit dog against ranked ACC teams. His lone loss was against Louisville when they gave up 2 defensive scores, basically a defensive score and a blocked field goal. So they actually had the yardage edge, first down edge. Probably should have beat Louisville on the road in that game had it not been for the 28-point turnaround, 2 14-point swings. So it's a very dangerous Georgia Tech team. But I agree with you. Without Haynes King, they're a little bit different, and Miami can put the points on the board. I would have made the line 10 in this game, and had Haynes King been healthy, I probably would have made it 7. So lean a little bit with Georgia Tech, but you got to be worried about the Haynes King factor.
Yeah, just two different offenses. Zach Pyron or Haynes King. The offense has certainly suffered the last couple of weeks without King.
Might be Aaron Philo. Remember, he came in late in that game against Virginia Tech and led a couple of drives. So Aaron Philo is a possibility as well at QB if it's not Haynes King.
Phil, I'm just glad I didn't take the bait with the Blue Devils last week against Miami, who were catching 20. We're up 11 who were up 11 in the third quarter, and then Miami finished the game on a 35-3 run. So I'm glad I stayed away from that one last week. And Manny Diaz returned to Hard Rock Stadium. So that's Miami and Georgia Tech at 12 with quarterback questions. Also quarterback questions at noon on ABC with Florida taking to the field in Austin against 5th-ranked Texas. TJ Lagway not yet ruled out as of earlier this week with a left hamstring injury suffered in the first half of a 34-20 loss to Georgia, where they led 13-6 at intermission before Lagway was carted off the field. Horns haven't looked like a championship contender the last couple of weeks against Georgia and Vanderbilt. Gators have covered in each of their last 5 games, though. Texas allowing just 3.8 yards per play, tops in the nation, also defending the pass better than anyone else. I think this might be a game where we see the Texas that we were more accustomed to early in the season. However, I like Florida still to go on the road. They're playing much better to cover more than 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, and I think Florida might have beat Georgia last week if Lagway didn't go out. They were playing great. I thought they were outplaying Georgia. And with Lagway, they had a shot getting down to a third-string quarterback. And the thing about Aiden Warner is he's a Yale transfer, right? So you expect that he was probably Yale's starter. Guess what? He didn't even play at Yale. So you're talking about a walk-on that hasn't played. He got a couple of snaps in at Florida, and that was it prior to playing that last week against Georgia, of all teams. And now they're taking on Texas, of all teams. You're right. Texas played great at the start of the year. They were dominant. You worry about that if you bet Florida. And on the flip side, if you bet Texas, I worry about the fact Florida's playing really good football right now and probably could have beaten Georgia. But the quarterback situation probably scares me off. If this was 100% Lagway in this game, I'd have the line 7-10. The line's way up there because of the quarterback situation. So I'm personally staying away from it because I don't know who's going to be the quarterback for Florida.
Tripp, before you take us to Piscataway, this is the first meeting between Texas and Florida since 1940. So here's some historical data for you to incorporate into your handicapping. 1940 inventions: the computer, the slinky, the frisbee, the silly putty. And where the hell would we be without the aerosol can? I mean, come on. The aerosol spray can? Give me the Gators, cover 21.5.
I'm surprised Twinkie wasn't around longer.
Ooh, Slinky. I don't know about the Twinkie. But
you said Slinky. Gotcha.
Yeah, Slinky.
Okay.
Wow, way more important than the computer.
Yeah.
Let's go to the Big Ten. Minnesota, another improving team here. They're on a 4-game win streak going into the weekend road trip to Rutgers. Gophers favored by 6 in Piscataway. Minnesota's only losses back in week 1, just 2 points in that Carolina game that came down to a field goal at the end. They lost to Iowa, lost a close one in the Big House to Michigan. They're playing good defense, only giving up 290 yards per game. That's 9th best in college football. Rutgers seems to be heading in the other direction. They lost their last 4 times out. With Minnesota under the touchdown number here, only laying 6, you think there's any value there, Phil?
I think a lot depends on how healthy that Rutgers defense gets. You go back to the Nebraska game. I thought Rutgers played really well. 18 to 15 first down edge in the game. Came up 7 points short on the scoreboard, but their defense got banged up. And the last 3 games, it hasn't been pretty. They've been giving up a lot of yards, a lot of points in each game. And they have had a bye week to get ready. Monangai, they've got a quarterback. Ethan Kelly McManus, their quarterback, was Minnesota's starter last year. So, he's got a little bit of an axe to grind because he was going to lose his job there at Minnesota. You look at current form, Minnesota is playing a lot better. I like the way they dominated Maryland at home. Played a good game against Illinois on the road. That's a ranked Illinois team. But this is a backs-to-the-wall game for Rutgers. I mean, if Rutgers is going to do anything this year and Coach Schiano feels they will get this thing turned around, then this would be the game to do so. So I'm staying away from it. Sounds like Tripp likes Minnesota, though.
It does.
To the Gophers, yeah.
Okay, all right. The Twinkie invented in 1930 in Illinois, and it was a Canadian-born baker who saw at his company, Continental Baking Company, that the strawberry shortcake equipment was sitting idle when the strawberries were out of season. So he thought, what can we do when it's not strawberry season? And he came up with the Twinkie. So amazing.
Learn something new every week on this show. I love it. Thank you.
Every new. Well, Boston College and Syracuse have been playing well before the Twinkie was invented. That's 6 years. 1924 was the first meeting. It'll be the 58th meeting in this Northeast rivalry coming up here on Saturday at noon on the CW. BC at home is laying 1.5. 53 is the total. Orange scored their largest comeback since 2012, down 18 against Virginia Tech, winning in overtime 38-31. Phil, BC has dropped 3 in a row. Off a bye, lost 31-27 to Louisville 2 Fridays ago. And if you remember that one, they led the Cardinals 20-0.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you look at these two teams on paper. Syracuse is plus 46 yards per game in ACC play. Boston College is minus 62 yards per game in ACC play. Once again, on Phil Steele Plus, I've got that all broken down. You get it on each team page, but also have it broken down on the schedule predictor. And I think the schedule predictor in these YPG games like this went 7-3 last week. So that's a pretty good indicator that Syracuse is a better team. But Syracuse just took on a team without their quarterback, without their running back. And watching the game, I thought for sure they were going to lose the home game. Miracle comeback, win the thing in overtime. Now they've got to go on the road. So I think talent-wise, I'm going to give the edge to Syracuse. I think they can go on the road and win, but not one of my top 10 or 15 plays of the week.
All right, let's go to the craziest conference in all of college football, the Big 12. West Virginia on the road this week facing Cincinnati. Bearcats favored by 5. Both teams coming off a bye. I think Cincinnati really has a chance to flip things upside down in the Big 12. They're favored here. Next up, they've got road trips to Iowa State and Kansas State. Those games all of a sudden look a little bit more winnable. Cincinnati also coming in with 5 wins, so they're looking for number 6 to get bowl eligible. Lots of injury issues for West Virginia. Got a couple of starting DBs that might be out. Garrett Green likely to miss another game. Told everyone on Tuesday on the Roddy Show this was my favorite play on the board, and I look on the dock here and I see, Phil, you like West Virginia. So go ahead, ruin my day. Tell me why the Nears are going to pull the upset here.
Yeah, Phil, I was going to frame that more emphatically if Tripp didn't go there. Tripp was yelling on top of Mount Everest Tuesday morning show with Roddy Jones that this was the best play on the entire board, Cincinnati against West Virginia, covering whatever number, 4.5, 3.5. It didn't matter, but it was 4.5. Now it's at 5. But you don't feel as strongly as Tripp does about this one, do you, Phil?
No, actually, I lean with West Virginia. I think you have two go-with teams here. You look at Nico Miracle for West Virginia. He's 2-0 as a starter. Beat Texas Tech, beat Arizona. The Arizona game wasn't as close as the final score. It was like 31-12 or something in the fourth quarter. Arizona got 2 late touchdowns. So I think West Virginia is a dangerous team. I would have put the line at Cincinnati -3, giving them the home field edge. Now, I will say this about Cincinnati. The worst game they played all year was their last one against Colorado, and that was 14-14 at Colorado. They dominated Arizona State. They beat UCF on the road. The Pittsburgh game they had locked up and sealed. They just got a little conservative. I thought they outplayed Texas Tech on the road. So only one bad game for Cincinnati all year. West Virginia's had a couple, but I rate the two teams even. So it wasn't a strong play on West Virginia. We could go with Tripp Cincinnati if he wants. I just would have put the line at 3. I'm literally laying over a field goal here because I think West Virginia is a really good team as well.
Back-to-back home games for UAB, who led Tulsa 45-0 in the waning moments of the first half for a Golden Hurricane touchdown. That was an eyesore on the scoreboard ticker. It worked out for UAB, who's hosting now UConn. The Blazers are catching 6.5, 56.5, so total 230 on ESPN+. Final one before we get to the heart of the middle portion of the Week 11 Saturday. And Phil, Huskies hurt you last week. Georgia State, 2 fourth-quarter touchdowns in covering the 7.5.
Brutal.
First road test for UConn after 6 straight at home. It's been since September 14th.
Yeah, locked up and sealed with that Connecticut game last week, wasn't it? And then, boom, all of a sudden you look and it's a half-point loss at the end of the day. But that's the way it goes, I guess, sometimes in football. And, I thought I was looking at I've always lined the two teams up side by side on philsteele.com. And I noticed this lack of ats on the Connecticut side. I'm like, oh, Todd must have missed something, didn't have the correct thing in there. No, they haven't been, just like you said, on the road since September the 14th. So 2 months. And then you say, well, how does Connecticut do on the road? Well, coming into the year, they are 7-43. I guess you could show the screen here, Kyle. I've got these spread records for each of the teams, and they're in more categories than the magazine. So there's Connecticut on the left. This shows you how they do against ranked teams, top 10 teams, conference dog by 20 or more, conference dog by 3 or less. All these categories broken down for you. But we're making it real simple here. Just take a look at the away. They are 7-43. And this year, how about 0-2? So make that 7-45 on the road this year for Connecticut. Meanwhile, UAB has been a very strong home team. As you see here, since they returned from their 2 years off, they are 33-6 at home. This year, they're 2-2, so that makes it 35-8 at home. So you have a very strong home team against a team that hasn't traveled in 2 months. And that has me leaning with UAB plus the points here. I also like the way they played against Tulsa in the last game. Pretty much dominated that thing, 59-21. Look what it was at the half. We give you halftime scores and breakdowns. It was 45-0 at the half, and they won 59-21. So even more impressive than the final score. I'm going to take UAB plus the points in this one.
Yeah, Jalen Kitna threw for 404 yards, 6 tutties, which was an FBS record for UAB in that eventual 59-21 win over Tulsa last week. Hotty toddy, let's go to the Grove. 16th ranked Ole Miss hosting 2nd ranked Georgia. Bulldogs are laying 2.5, 55 the total, 3:30 game on ABC. Rebs broke or tied 13 different school records in a dominant 63-31 win at Arkansas. Dogs won 52-17 in Athens in a meeting between these two last season. Last meeting in Oxford, 45-14 in 2016. That was Ole Miss scoring the first 45 points of that game. So they won the last meeting over Georgia, the last time these two met in Oxford. I'm going to be producing this broadcast, Phil. I'm jacked up. I'm going to be in studio 2 hours ahead of kickoff, 2-hour pregame show on the Ole Miss radio network. I can't wait, but I'm unsure if Lane Kiffin and them can come through. They haven't proven to on this stage yet during Kiffin's tenure in Oxford.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with you on that, Kyle. I think when you take a look, remember I won against Georgia last week, and one of the reasons was, make Georgia a large favorite, and they sort of go through the motions. We haven't seen them dominate teams. Mississippi State, they beat by 10, Auburn by 18, could have lost to Florida last week. Well, make them a motivated team, and I'm sure Kirby Smart will have his team convinced they are the underdog, and no one is picking Georgia this week, much like he did against Texas. And you look, they went into a red hot Texas and had a 23-0 lead at the half with a 170 to 38 yard edge. Ole Miss a little banged up at the skill positions, and I know they put up a lot of points on Arkansas, but hell, they had receivers running free in the secondary that were just wide open and just running behind, and it was a lot of free yards. They're not going to get those free yards from Georgia this week. Prior to that, they only averaged 24 points per game in SEC play. I think this is an A game for Georgia, and I like the Bulldogs to go into there and come out with the win.
Yeah, if Carson Beck stops playing for the other team, Georgia's going to be really, really tough to beat coming down the stretch of the season here. I mean, they've kind of done this everything in spite of him, but yeah, if he can stop turning the ball over, Georgia's going to be really tough.
His split's much worse on the road in throwing interceptions. So
you got to think they're going to straighten some of that out this week. You have to think so. Anyways, jumping to the Big Ten, 9-0 Indiana, another opportunity to make a statement on Saturday. They're hosting Michigan. 14.5 point spread in this one. Hoosiers favored. They beat each opponent this season by 14 or more. You got to think there's still going to be some pressure here. It is Michigan. Wolverines have dominated this series, but it's a different season. IU's been one of the best offensive teams in the nation. They can play defense too, 20th against the run. They've been great on early downs. That could be trouble for Michigan with the quarterback carousel. They've got to get Loveland involved in the offense to have a chance here. Also, I think the Hoosiers might feel a little disrespected over the first playoff rankings. Some one-loss teams still ahead of them. I don't think Cignetti and Rourke are going to be taking their foot off the gas in this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're the better team. They're undervalued. And a little story for you about streaks. And by the way, Indiana 9-0 against the spread this year, right? So here's my story about streaks. Now, during the season, I work 100 hours a week. During the magazine season, which takes me all the way up through June, I work about 80 hours a week. But in the summer, I do have spare time. And so I'm in Atlantis in the summertime, and I'm playing roulette. Do either of you guys play roulette?
I have a couple of times, but
yeah,
not the way you play.
If you're playing out on the regular floor, it's 38-1. You go to the high rollers room. There's only a single zero on the table, not the double zero. Your odds are better, 37-1. That's usually where I play. But here, they don't open the high rollers room till later at night. That way, they get more people playing the 38-1 odds. So I'm out at the regular tables, playing in Atlantis, and the 5 straight reds on the board, right? Which means the red has come in 5 straight. So I had a guy sit down next to me, and I'm just playing casual money here, and he goes, "Man, red 5 straight. I know black is coming in." And so I give him my philosophy on streaks, which is you can when you play on a streak, you win many times and you lose only once. He's like, yeah, whatever. Black is coming in because it's been 5 straight reds. So spin the wheel, boom, red comes in again. So, he had put 100 on black. He goes, "I know for sure this time." Puts another 100 on black. Same thing happens. Rinse and repeat. I go all the way through 12 spins now. Red has come in. This guy's dropped $700 betting black's going to come in. He keeps telling me, "This is it. This is it." And finally, black comes in. You should have seen this guy react. He was so happy, slaps me on the back, goes, "See, I told you black was coming in." Walks from the table happy. He was down $700 playing against a streak. So never play against streaks. Indiana's won 9 in a row. They are the better team. And you know what? If Michigan's emblem was on Indiana's helmets and Indiana on Michigan's helmets, Indiana would be a 28-point favorite here. I like the Hoosiers minus the points.
So that roulette table coming up, crimson and cream here. Stick with IU, right?
Phil, you're I'll tell you this. I love your stories. You're talking to a couple of guys who've probably never seen the inside of the high rollers. but goals for sure. Goals. That would be great. All right, let's talk Iowa State and Kansas. Cyclones caught their first loss of the season last week against Texas Tech. Hard to believe. Cyclones are now only a field goal favorite this week, taking on Kansas Saturday at 3:30. Iowa State lost in the last minute of that game. They've still got a chance to get to the Big 12 championship. I would think that they are going to get right this week. This was, to me, a little bit of a surprising number to only be at 3, Phil.
Yeah, I think when you look at the overall record of the teams, you say, wow. But I mean, let's keep in mind, Kansas has played really well this year, led Illinois in the fourth quarter, led a UNLV in the fourth quarter, led Virginia by 2 scores in the fourth quarter, did lose to TCU, a game they led in the second half. Arizona State scored a late touchdown to beat them. And Kansas State, they took to the wire, only lost by 2. So they're really not a 2-6 team. They're much better. However, I do agree with you, Tripp. I like Iowa State here. I think they're the best team in the Big 12. One of the most complete teams. 2 weeks ago, they gave up 2 interception returns for touchdowns. That's a 28-point swing and still won the game. Last week, they just lost on a late touchdown. They're off a loss. And the game's being played in Arrowhead. I think there might be as many, maybe even a little more Iowa State fans here. They're having a better season than Kansas is, and they always travel well here. So I definitely like Iowa State. And I think the reason that the line's 3 is they're giving Kansas the 3-point home edge. I don't know if you give Kansas a 3-point home edge here. I'd put it more towards even, which has Iowa State the better team. I've got Iowa State by 7 or more.
Let's look at the total in Denton for Army and North Texas. Black Knights entered at number 25 in the CFP rankings, 18th in the AP poll. If you look at sides, I think it was Army who opened up as a 3.5-point favorite. It's grown to 6, but that over-under total at 63.5, Phil, is what I'm really locked in on. I'm concerned about Bryson Daly, though, who didn't play last time out. Unknown injury, illness, kept him out of practice all week, and they failed to cover against Air Force in a 20-3 game. In fact, they haven't covered the past 2 weeks after a 6-0 ATS start, but the over has hit in 7 of 8 mean green games. North Texas has scored 40-plus in 5 of 8 games, including at least 35 in all of their games except for 1. They can't defend the run, which speaks to Army's strength. Army really hasn't been challenged in defending the pass, which certainly speaks to North Texas and Chandler Morrison. I like the 63.5 going over here, Phil. Do you agree?
I agree with you 100%. I love the over in this one, and it's exactly what you just mentioned. You go back to last week. I like the under in the Air Force Army game. Why is that? Because when you run the option, your advantage is when you take on teams that don't prepare for the option. But when you take on a service academy, they run the option all the time. They run it at full speed. You face the option all the time. And as expected, they struggled. Both sides of the ball struggled to move last week in a 20-3 game. But now they're taking on a North Texas team that can't stop the run. These guys are giving up 5.6 yards per carry. And even though, let's say Army has a backup quarterback, although with the spread rising like that, you would think Daly's playing, but let's say Daly doesn't play. Last week, they had a backup quarterback taking on a team that knew how to defend the option. Now he's taking on a team that struggles against the run, strength against weakness. And keep in mind, the previous 4 games, Army had over 40 points in each of those games. Now, on the flip side of the equation, Army struggled for years. If you look at my past defense rankings over the last 30 years, I believe their highest ranking ever was 55 in my past D rankings because they don't face passing quarterbacks. And who have they faced this year? An FCS team, Florida Atlantic, Rice. They only face 2 teams that rank in the top 60 in pass offense. And both those teams, Tulsa and UAB, not Tulsa, UAB and East Carolina, had quarterbacks making just their second start. Now they're taking on Chandler Morris, a quarterback that's been playing all year and been very productive. I see North Texas scoring at will. I see Army scoring at will. 63.5 seems cheap. And I'll take you back to 2022. Remember 2022, Army played Wake Forest, or 2021, I should say. Army played Wake Forest. The final there was 70-56. It seemed like every team that got the ball just scored instantly. I think we might have a game like that going on here.
I think I saw Sam Hartman at the bar that night in Winston-Salem after that game at Whiskey Dogs. A little plug for a local watering hole here in the Camel City. For those of you watching on the Varsity channel, you can see it scrolling across the bottom. Let me give it to you and communicate it for all of those listening on the audio podcast. The Phil Steele Show Guarantee is coming up at the end of the program, roughly 20 minutes or so. And I have a feeling we might go back to Denton for one of Phil's 3 top plays this week. So make sure you stay tuned for that, because this week, if Phil doesn't give you a 500 or better record with his 3 plays, if Phil does not go 2-1 or better with his 3 power plays, you will get the NFL Inside the Press Box for free this weekend, Week 10 in the NFL for Sunday. The code is PS Show, and that is if Phil does not deliver with a winning week. It's the Phil Steele Show Guarantee. Stay tuned for that in about 20 minutes. Tripp?
Yeah, I like the over there too. I mean, anything. I think we're going to have to make North Texas an auto play. Any total under 70, just take the over. Jumping back to the ACC, Kyle, you mentioned it earlier. It's worth mentioning again. One of the worst beats last week had to be Duke plus 21.5 at Miami. Blue Devils led by 11 in the third quarter, just evaporated on them. Ended up losing by 22. But hey, that's what we're here for. We're trying to give you enough winners to offset when bad things happen, because life isn't always fair, you know. Duke goes to Raleigh this week. They're facing NC State. The Wolfpack had it rolling against Stanford. Don't fact check me here, but Wolfpack scored 59. I think that's the most they've ever scored in a conference game for NC State. Quarterback CJ Bailey, another impressive game. How can Duke respond here, Phil? They haven't won in Carter Finley since 2009. NC State favored by 3 in this one.
Very philosophical of you, Tripp, to
Thank
talk
you.
about how life is not always kind to you. That's really going out of the box there. But yeah, in this game here, I think when you look at Duke, they are a team that has a really good record. They are 6-3, but who have they played this year, and who have they really beaten this year? North Carolina was their best win of the season, and that was a game that North Carolina led 20-0 in the third quarter. Got a sort of a miracle comeback. They are minus 91 yards per game in ACC play, sort of doing it with smoke and mirrors so far. NC State, now you had the Grayson McCall. He's injured. Will he play? CJ Bailey's the QB. Now CJ Bailey is the QB, and we've seen the offense come to life. I thought the turnaround for NC State was the fourth quarter against Cal. They were down by 2 scores, ended up coming back and winning that game. I think that gave their season life. Had they lost that game, they might have gone into the dumpster, but they won that game, showed a lot of life last week against Stanford. Now they got 3 games left. This team, which had opened just 3-4, could actually finish 8-4 this year. They've got Duke, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, winnable games. They're playing better football. Jordan Waters, their top running back, is a transfer from Duke. He was Duke's best running back last year. So I look for a big game out of him. They got Casey Concepcion, who's dangerous anytime he touches the ball. And I think NC State, which is plus 20 yards per game in ACC play, playing better. I like the Wolfpack minus the points at home.
Yeah, Waters had a 94-yard touchdown run, part of a stretch where the Wolfpack scored 3 touchdowns on 4 plays against Stanford, who's lost 6 in a row. State had lost 2 in a row at home, and now looking for a second straight win against the Blue Devils. They certainly miss Jordan Waters. Let's move to 21st-ranked Colorado and Texas Tech in Lubbock. Tortillas are going to be flying for this one. It felt like the football gods really owed Texas Tech one last week, though, after the way they choked away the game in Fort Worth against TCU. They earned the 1-point win in Ames to knock Iowa State from the rank of the unbeatens. Bus picked a good time to sit idle as a Big 12 team, really, as chaos was ensuing all around them, with K-State taking the loss as well, and then the Clones falling. This will be a big noon kickoff. Phil, I think it was 12-14 last week for Penn State and Ohio State. So it was right on your mark. I overshot. We'll see if we can get it prior to 12-10 this week. I mean, it's in Lubbock for the first time ever. You're not used to seeing Texas Tech in this sort of spot, but this should be a dandy of a game. Red Raiders also debuting their new Adidas Mahomes strategy uniform. So look for that, Phil. You're going to hate it on television. I can already see it. The Gladiator logo for Mahomes, that insignia is going to be very loud and proud on the Tech uniform Saturday.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head, Kyle. When I'm watching 12 games and when you got a team that's not in a regular uniform, you're like, who is that? And it takes me at least 2 series to get completely caught up to where I can just watch all 12 games and know which team is which when they have those different uniforms. It's a game where I find it tough to go against Texas Tech and Lubbock. I find it tough to go against Colorado ever since that Hail Mary pass against Baylor. They've been a completely different team. So I'm going to let you guys pick this game.
Well, here's the thing. Let me correct so big noon is there, but the kick isn't until 4 o'clock. So you're waiting maybe the most amount of time after big noon, but it will be a 4 o'clock kick. I like Colorado. I just think the way Deion has those guys outperforming really all of our expectations to this point, and the position that they have themselves in near the top of the Big 12 or at the top, still in contention for not just the playoff, but the Big 12 title as well. Man, this is going to be a slow. I think this could go down as one of the better games on the weekend, but I like the Buffs to go in. It's 3.5, the number. Give me Colorado to continue that voodoo.
I like Colorado myself. I like them quite a bit, actually, in this game. The only real hesitation for me is just, I think I said on the Friday show last week, it felt like a game Iowa State might lose to Texas Tech last week, despite the big spread, just because that's the conference they're playing in. That's the Big 12. You get surprises every week. And hopefully not this week, because Colorado, I think that'll be on my board. That's a play I want to make there.
Travis Hunter did move to the Heisman favorite to the front of the line last week. Started at plus 2,500, jumped to plus 275, was the favorite for the first time. Cam Ward has a slight edge, plus 185 heading into week 11. Travis Hunter at plus 225. So Phil was staying away from this game, Tripp. So why don't you take us down to the Crescent City?
Hey, what's Dylan Gabriel's Heisman odds right now?
Oh, it keeps scrolling. Plus 275, so third.
Probably not a bad bet there, because we're going to end up on a quarterback every year, it seems. I'm kind of not secretly, but kind of rooting for Genty or Hunter or someone to win just from a different position group.
Genty plus 600, Curtis Rourke at plus 3,000.
Yeah.
If they beat Ohio State, that looks cheap.
Yeah.
Yep. Very true. All right. One of the better spread teams in college football is going to have another big number to cover this week. Tulane, lane 26.5 at home against Temple, 4 p.m. Saturday. Green Wave 7-2 straight up against 7-2 straight up and against the spread this season. But spread's up there pretty high. Temple's had their moments this year where they've looked pretty decent. Maybe enough to keep us away from this one, Phil.
Yeah, that's pretty much the way I feel. The thing about Temple, they actually play good defense. You look at them overall, they're holding opponents to 6 yards below their season average. Not what you would expect out of a 2-6 team. Tulane, now they've got Navy on deck. This is speaking for me, not Coach Summerall, but if I had Navy on deck, I'd sneak in a few practices against the option right now this week. Maybe they're not fully focused on Temple, with big Navy on deck, with big Memphis on deck. And, we saw the Rice game a couple weeks ago when they were at home, big favorite, only won by 14. So I would lean with Tulane, but it wouldn't be one of my top plays.
All right, a couple more before we get to the evening, which will be headlined by Alabama and LSU in Death Valley. Let's go to Music City, South Carolina. 3.5-point favorite, 45.5 is the total at 24th ranked Vanderbilt. Didn't crack the CFP rankings. That would have been something, certainly for Vandy. I'm sure it would have been their first appearance ever in those rankings, but still inside the AP top 25. 415 is the start in the SEC network. Huge opportunity awaits the bowl-bound Doors, who they haven't beaten since 2008, that being South Carolina. Gamecocks use that incredible home field advantage. What a scene last week against Texas A&M with Sandstorm at Willie Bryce, 44-20 the final. Vandy's Diego Pavia beat Hugh Freeze for a third straight season, 17-7 the win for Vanderbilt over Auburn on the Plains.
Yeah, and this one I'm going to lean with South Carolina. First of all, I think they will have the crowd edge. Most SEC visitors do. And I just like the overall talent of the South Carolina team. They've got one of the nastiest defensive front sevens in the SEC. And they also have a quarterback in Lenore Sellers, who, if he didn't get hurt against LSU in the second quarter, remember, I think they had -1 yards in the third quarter without him. They beat LSU at home, and they'd have a much better record right now. And they came within 2 points of Alabama. So you're talking about a South Carolina team that's under the radar. I feel they're one of the better teams in the SEC. And Vanderbilt's a great story, but unlike most of the games, they're not a large underdog here. In fact, they probably almost feel like a favorite with the line 3.5. So I'm going to go with South Carolina to go on the road and get the win, just for that nasty defense and the fact that last week Vandy only had 227 yards against Auburn. They got outgained by 100 yards.
Yeah, very intrigued to see how that one plays out. That's a game that's not really getting enough attention, if you ask me. Conference USA showdown in Las Cruces, Saturday night, 6 o'clock. Western Kentucky on the road at New Mexico State. Hilltoppers favored by 18.5. Their quarterback, Caden Veldkamp's been really good coming in for the injured TJ Finley. Last 3 games, he's got 9 touchdowns to just 1 interception. I think Western Kentucky wins here, but that's a lot of points to cover. Do you have a side you like here in this one, Phil?
Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head. Western Kentucky's a better team. I tell you what, if this game was being played at Western Kentucky, I would favor Western Kentucky by 31, 35 points, because you look at New Mexico State on the road this year, they are losing by 33 points per game.
Wow.
Let's take a look at them at home. They almost beat Liberty. In fact, that thing went to overtime. They lost to New Mexico by 10. They beat Louisiana Tech. They are minus 2 points per game at home. So they play a lot better at home, altitude for some reason. And it's not like they have a dominant home crowd. But West Kentucky, disappointing against Kennesaw State, I would say, only winning by 17 last week. Now they got to go on the road. Yeah, I would take the points here at New Mexico State. Once again, I would have played Western Kentucky if they were at home, but New Mexico State's 2 different teams, different team at home.
I love how we just glossed past a sicko special at 4 o'clock. Kennesaw State and UTEP, a combined 2-15, a combined 2-8 inside CUSA. Give me Scotty Walden, 3.5-point favorites at home over Kennesaw State. I might come back to that. I might make that one of my power plays. Okay. But that's a perfect lead-in to Tiger Stadium in Death Valley, where LSU has won 13 consecutive games at night.
15.
Okay? 15 consecutive games that night, with Alabama, 11th ranked Crimson Tide, are coming in 3-point favorites. 58 is the total. 7:30 on ABC. Phil, I was at this game 10 years ago when I was living in Baton Rouge. I won't recite the expletives that were being hurled by 102,000 people for the entirety of that game when the outcome was still in doubt towards Nick Saban. But Nick Saban isn't on the sideline for this one. It's his 2 former teams. Kellen DeBoer's baptism into this rivalry under the lights in Death Valley as 3-point favorites. That game, by the way, 10 years ago, Bama won in OT. I mean, it lived up to all the hype and more as Blake Sims drove the Tide 55 yards, field goal tied it, and then it was DeAndre White with a touchdown reception 10 years ago. So this game brings us 2024. LSU catching 3, a home dog under the lights in Death Valley. Got to lean LSU, right?
I'm going to give the slightest. Well, actually, I have Alabama winning the game by 3, so I have really nothing on this game. Brian Kelly is 13-0 at home at night in Death Valley. LSU is 15-0. They've won 2 prior to Kelly.
Sure.
But when you look at this one, I look at how LSU struggles against running quarterbacks. As mentioned, Lenora Sellers at QB with South Carolina. If he doesn't get injured, I think South Carolina beats him. And then look at Texas A&M in the second half. With Marcel Reed. Now you got Jalen Milroe. I'll take Jalen Milroe over both Sellers and Reed. I think he's a better overall QB. We saw how dangerous he could be against Georgia earlier in the year. So I think Alabama's a better team, can sneak out of here with the win. But how do you lay more than 3 points on the road in Death Valley at night?
Yeah, day or night, they've won 14 in a row at home under Brian Kelly as well. So that'll be fun. You want to take us to the other game of the century? At least 31 years ago.
Century. I was going to say I do the LSU Bama game. Don't hate the over in that one either. 58. I could see either team cracking 30 in that game. Yeah. But yeah, Kyle, I would normally say let's bet a beer on this game, but this year I'm going to pass. Florida State at Notre Dame, 7:30 Saturday night. Back on November 13th, 1993. That was the first college football game I ever watched, paid attention to. Even though the Noles lost that game, they went on to win their first national championship that season. A lifelong fan was born in myself. If you're watching this on YouTube, after we finish this up, search for Bob Costas' intro to that game. It's pretty amazing. It'll give you chills. But back to reality, it's a 1-8 Florida State team heading to South Bend to face 7-1 Notre Dame. Irish favored by 26. It's probably not enough. FSU still hasn't topped 16 points on American soil. Only 11 last week against UNC. Just historically bad offense from Mike Norvell and the Seminoles. Let me throw this at you too. Just try to get through this game for Florida State. Get to a bye week, because who knows, if you stay healthy, maybe you can pull an upset over Charleston Southern a couple weeks from now.
Spoken like a true Seminole fan. Yeah, I think the way Florida State's offense is struggling, you hit it right on the head. Last week when they played North Carolina, 201 yards. That was 185 yards less than North Carolina normally allows. So they are struggling, whether it's Brock Glenn or whether it's Croman Hook. I mean, they are really struggling with QB overall. And they brought in so many transfers, and these transfers are coming in to a team that was unbeaten in the regular season last year, expecting big things. You got to be wondering if they're looking at transferring out. Well, what's the buy-in at this point? Notre Dame, meanwhile, is fresh off a bye, taking out a team off of 4 weeks. Notre Dame's got a dominant defense. Maybe they smell shutout in this one. And offensively, I like the way Riley Leonard and the offense are coming along. So, and the final factor, Notre Dame is 16-2 against the spread against ACC teams. So I'm going to take the Irish and lay the 26. Frankly, I thought the line would move up to 28. That seems more of a reasonable number for the game. So grab it while it's still 26.
Tripp, I'm sorry. I realized I took both of the 2 ranked-on-ranked games in setting things up for Week 11, but I did give you FSU and Notre Dame, so
Yeah,
I gave you your flowers.
The Knowles, man.
Yeah, always. Oklahoma and Missouri. Tigers are catching 2.5 at home, 7:45 on SEC Network. Mizzou debuted at 24 in the CFP. Hard to imagine any scenario where they could backdoor their way into the playoff bracket, given how bad they lost to Texas A&M and to Alabama. Last time we saw Drink and company, they were ransacked by the Tide in T-Town, 34-zip. Oklahoma, they played Maine. I don't know what we can take from that, 59-14. It is the 97th overall meeting between these two, but the first, Phil, since 2011. Sooners have won 20 of 22, but they split the only 2 previous meetings, both coming at night in Columbia.
Yeah, and this is one where I think if you put Oklahoma against Missouri's schedule and Missouri against Oklahoma's schedule, the records are similar. Maybe even Oklahoma has a better season. It's one where I like the talent level of Oklahoma. I know Missouri's tough at home, but they don't do great as a home favorite. But they have played the softest schedule of any team in the SEC right now. I mean, Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College. Vanderbilt was a good win, but Vanderbilt could have beat them. UMass, and then they beat Auburn. But once again, those are their wins this year against real opponents they've lost. And Oklahoma, they've got losses to Ole Miss, South Carolina, Texas, Tennessee, and they even have a win at Auburn. So I think schedule strength play of the week would probably be Oklahoma here. They're taking on the toughest schedule in the SEC this year. Missouri's taking on the weakest. And I'm going to go with Oklahoma in this one.
All right, let's go to the Smurf turf. Boise State favored by 24 at home, 60.5 total, 8 o'clock on Fox. They host Nevada. Ashton Genty's pace has slowed in catching Barry Sanders, but the yards haven't been as easy to come by, although that was an extraordinary, absorbent amount of yardage and touchdowns for any human being to get. There's a reason why those records have stood as long as they have. He's still must-watch television, Phil, and week to week, given the Heisman, the CFP conversation around Boise State, who's number 12 in the rankings, a chance, too, to even maybe get a bye. If the Big 12 stumbles, let's say BYU falls and Boise State's ranked higher than your Big 12 champion, so much to play for. Style points mean something for the Broncos and even for Genty individually in relation to the Heisman.
Yeah, and you look at last week, San Diego State basically sold out against the run. They just said, you know what, we're not going to allow Ashton Genty to beat us. And then Matson goes against, one-on-one coverage in the secondary, 26 at 34 for 322 yards. So either die a slow death against Genty or you die a quick death against the pass. Nevada doesn't have a great defense. They're allowing opponents 14 yards above their average. I do look for a big game out of Genty. I don't think Nevada comes in with the same thing. And I thought last week might have been a letdown spot for Boise. It wasn't. They blew out San Diego State. You got to go with Boise on the blue turf here.
Whiteout game for Penn State Saturday night. They host Washington. Nittany Lions laying 13.5 at home. The whiteout thing seems to work. They've won their last 5, 7 of the last 8. And Penn State had their chances last week against Ohio State for sure. Drew Aller threw a pick inside the 5, and then they had another goal to go where they threw it again on 4th down. They couldn't do anything right when they got close to scoring last week against the Buckeyes. I like the spot here for Penn State. Off a loss, they want to stay in the mix for the college football playoff. And Washington, they're coming off a big win over USC, but I think Washington's actually a pretty good team, better than their record. If anything, I'd maybe take a look at the under here. It's 46.5 as the total, but I would trust both these defenses to make it tough to score. And Washington's had their share of problems too in the red zone with penalties and having to settle for field goals this year. What do you like here, Phil?
Yeah, I like your call on the under. I think that's probably the best thing here. And I would disagree with you saying Drew Allard threw an interception in the end zone. I mean, he threw the ball, it hit the wide receiver, and then the
Yeah,
defensive back stole it from him as he's
they
going out
did.
of bounds. And I thought originally watching it live, I thought, oh, they're going to review to see if it was a touchdown. And then in slow motion, you see the DB take the ball away from the wide receiver for an incredible interception. So I wouldn't say that was the
Yeah,
quarterback's
you're
fault.
right.
That was definitely a one of the best interceptions I've seen from any team. And as you mentioned, they were stopped on 1st and goal. You've got a Washington defense that's holding opponents to 99 yards per game, below their average this year. That's number 9 in the country. You got a Penn State team that's holding opponents to 106 yards per game, below their average. That's number 6 in the country. Generally, Penn State off a loss doesn't play great, but I think having a whiteout off a loss is going to help them here. And then the final factor to look at in your equation, if you are picking the side, is that Washington's been unbeatable at home this year. But look at the road games. They've had 4 games away from Husky Stadium. They're 0-4. They lost to Rutgers by 3, Washington State by 5, Iowa by 24, and Indiana by 14. So I think under is probably your best play in this game.
Yeah, you're right. I shouldn't have framed that on Aller because as we were watching it in the Blitz studio when they went to review, I thought just like you, I thought they were looking to see if it was a touchdown, and then you had to get that camera angle from behind the play to see that the DB had taken it away. We'll go back to the Big 12 here. Should see some points in Fort Worth Saturday night between Oklahoma State and TCU. Frogs favored by 11 and a half is what I'm seeing. Total up at 66.5. The Cowboys started 3-0. They've dropped their last 6 games, only covered in one of those. And TCU's back at home, chance to get their 6th win of the year, get to a bowl. Maybe a little lean with the Frogs here, Phil.
Yeah, and last week I liked Oklahoma State. I thought it was a back to the wall game. You're at home, you're off a bye, it's everything is there. You need to have a big win, and they just flat out failed. Granted, the game went to a 2.5-hour weather delay when they were down 7. The crowd didn't return, and they got blown out. But their defense is giving up over the last 4 games 303 yards per game on the ground. That's not the number that really upsets me. 6.7 yards per carry. They're giving almost 7 yards per run. So pick a TCU running back, put them on your fantasy football team. TCU runs the ball here. If Oklahoma State couldn't do it in a backs to the wall game, how are they going to do it on the road? I got to go with TCU minus the points in this one.
All right, a few more minutes with Phil, the Phil Steele Show Guarantee before we get him out of here with his power plays. UCF and Arizona State. Sun Devils at home, laying 356, the total, 7 o'clock on ESPN2. Kenny Dillingham, Phil, used to be Gus Malzahn's OC back in 2019. Second meeting, first since 2002. Arizona State looking to secure their first 5-0 start at home since 2013 when they went 7-0, and they hadn't won 7 of their first 9 overall since 2014 when they were 8-1. Cam Scatterbo with 4 Offensive Player of the Week honors in the Big 12. Only one player has more such honors across all the FBS, and that's Ashton Genty.
Yeah, and I think in this one, UCF looked great last week, but what team doesn't look great after playing Arizona? Meanwhile, Arizona State, as you mentioned, at night, at home, in the desert, that's usually where they're very tough. 4-0 this year at home. I like the way they're playing. I'm going to go with a better defense, which Arizona State has. I like Arizona State, and the spread's cheap at 3.
From the Valley to Air Force now with Fresno State visiting. Tell me about this matchup, Phil. Falcons have dropped 7 straight since a season opening win over Merrimack. Fresno State is favored by 10.5 on the road, 41 the total, 9:45 on Fox. One of 4 games kicking off after 9 o'clock, something we didn't have last week. Fresno hasn't beaten Air Force since 2012, though, and not on the road since 1997.
Yeah, I like the series part of it. I also really like the fact that, as bad as Air Force has been this year, Air Force is actually being outgained in Mountain West play by 44 yards per game, which is pretty decent. But Fresno, despite the fact they have a winning record, is being outgained by 75 yards per game. Hawaii had a 346, 176 yard edge against them. And generally, when a team gets to be 1-7, you figure there's going to be some players that quit. They've got other things on their mind. This is Service Academy, for crying out loud. These guys are not going to quit. So you've got Air Force at home in the altitude, colder weather. Should be about 40 some odd degrees at kickoff, dipping into the 30s against a California team. And I think it's a backs to the wall game for Air Force. They're not going to go down. They're not going to lie down the rest of the year. They're going to come out fired up. I like them to potentially pull the upset here.
All right, real quick, let's do Holy War 10-15 kick in Rice-Eccles Stadium. Utah, a home dog, getting 4 points against an undefeated BYU team. Utah has not looked good of late, but if there's a game left that they're going to be up for, it's this one. Really low total here, 40.5. Says it may be one of those grinded out, ugly games. You know, the Utes don't have any problem with that. What do you like here, Phil?
Yeah, and Utah actually has the best defense in the Mountain West Conference. And believe it or not, as disappointing as they have been this year, they have not been an underdog in a single game. So they lose outright to Arizona, Arizona State, TCU, Houston. None of them blowouts. All games they had a chance in. I think they do play their best game of the year here. And going back to the conference yards per game thing, Utah is actually plus 24 yards per game in conference play. You wouldn't think that because they come into this 2-4. Meanwhile, BYU, which is undefeated, is plus 3 yards per game in conference play. It's not like they're doing it dominating teams up front of the line of scrimmage. I think Utah in a must-win situation. They're 9-1 in the series, the last 10 games at home, and they're getting over a field goal at home. So I'm going to take Utah plus the points. They're first in the underdog role this year.
Yeah, you talk about a team like Utah who has underperformed all season, being able to flip the tenor of the season with one game. I mean, it would be against rival BYU. It comes in undefeated, ranked in 9th in front of Moss, 10-15 starts Salt Lake City. It'll be beautiful. All right, Phil, you're guaranteeing a winning week. Okay, the Phil Steele Show Guarantee. Must have a winning week. Phil's got to go 2-1 or better. Could go 3-0. Otherwise, NFL Inside the Press Box Week 10 is free. You'd go to philsteele.com, use the code PSSHOW, and that's if Phil doesn't have a winning week. So what are your 3 power plays that you're going to lean on here for Week 11, Phil?
Yeah, and the last time we had a guarantee, we went 3-0, so hoping for the same here. We talked about all 3 games. I like Air Force plus the 10.5 against Fresno State. I like over in the Army game. And I like Georgia minus the 2.5 against Ole Miss. So those are the 3 plays. Have to win at least 2 of them, or you get my NFL Inside the Press Box newsletter at $20 value, absolutely free.
And again, that's philsteele.com. The code will be PSSHOW. Tripp, I'll jump in, and then you can conclude with your favorite plays. Just to be different, because I love the Air Force play. I love the over in Army in North Texas. Give me the under Washington and Penn State, under 46, okay? Under 46 in Happy Valley. Give me Memphis bouncing back from a 44-36 loss to UTSA, favored by 9 against Rice, who somehow blew up the Navy last week. But give me an angry Memphis team coming in against an interim head coach to cover the 9 against a food. I'll stay away from LSU. I'll stay away from Indiana. Give me the sicko pick. UTEP covers 3.5 over Kennesaw State at home. So UTEP under Washington and Penn State, and Memphis covers the 9. What do you think, Tripp?
All right, give yourself the hook there. I'm looking at it right now. Give yourself
9.5?
46.5 for
Gotcha.
Penn State. That's current right now as I look at it. I'm sticking with Cincinnati. I'll take the Bearcats to cover 5. Iowa State, I can't go against it. To me, it's a little bit of a fishy line, but I like Iowa State to cover the field goal against Kansas, and I like Colorado too, minus 3.5.
I think those are all solid. Phil, it's been a blast. Week 11 has come and passed, at least in regards to the show. We still have an entire Saturday of football games on Thursday and Friday, and only 3 more of these shows coming up after this week. It's been a pleasure, as always, to have you.
Yeah, a lot of fun as always. I do like your pick with UTEP over Kennesaw State, so I agree with you on that.
Thank you. Scotty Walden. I'm going to channel my inner Scotty Walden spirit animal. In another life, I will be Scotty Walden. Love that, man. Okay, thank you. Phil Steele Show. Thank you to everyone watching on the Varsity Channel on YouTube and College Sports Now, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll talk to you next week here on the Phil Steele Show.